Barefoot Gen is a manga series by Keiji Nakazawa written in the 70s and 80s. It loosely depicts the author's experience surviving the atomic bombings of Hiroshima in 1945 as a young boy. In her journal article Flash Forward Democracy, Christine Hong argues that Barefoot Gen does not challenge American exceptionalism or truly indict America for the human rights atrocity of the atomic bombs. While Barefoot Gen nominally criticizes America's role in the devastation of Japan at the end of World War II, an equally acerbic assertion of Japan's role in its own destruction is embedded in the text. This can be seen in the following episode of the story in which Japanese people commit suicide as Allied forces firebomb their cities. On the first page, the American B-29s whiz past, dropping dozens of firebombs in cities throughout Japan. The page is filled to the brim, no space is left empty, communicating the inescapability of the fires and destruction. Japanese bodies fly out of the explosions with anguished expressions. The caption, "We," accompanies the image of the bombs sailing through the air, paired with the ROARRR roar caption next to the planes. The reader understands that the American offensive is brutal and tragic, but also strong and inevitable. The Americans are so unaffected that their bombs carry the light-hearted sound effect, "We." As the firebombs rain down on a bunch of children and civilians, the Americans are represented only as abstract, earth-scorching war objects, belligerent and unaware of their targets. This speaks to what Christine Hong describes as, quote, the limitations of U.S. historical consciousness that presided after the war ended, enabled by, quote, the literal shortcomings of perspective as conventionalized in the iconic aerial images of the mushroom cloud and scorched earth, end quote, which made Japanese suffering an abstraction and obscured the possibility of viewing the decision to drop the A-bomb as a human rights atrocity. Nakazawa communicates with these images that both enemies, the Japanese and Americans, were abstractions to one another. The Americans are indiscriminate war demons to the Japanese, and to the Americans, the Japanese are tiny, expendable lives to be extinguished from an aerial perspective. To buttress Hong's thesis that Barefoot Gen represents, quote, hibakusha literature that is remarkably free of blame towards the United States, end quote, the American bombs are never accompanied by malicious/evil faces of the Americans behind them. Nakazawa does not spend much time demonizing them. He only communicates that the Japanese saw them as demons, mostly due to Japanese war propaganda. The third page shows Japanese women and children reacting to the arrival of Yankees who demand Japan's peaceful surrender. They react by committing suicide, hurling themselves off of a cliff, clinging to their faith in the emperor and the, quote, great Japanese empire. The children, the only people not affected by the irrationality of war fever, resist, saying, "Wah, no, I don't wanna." And the reader is moved to both pity and disdain the adult Japanese people who have been so successfully deceived by their government that they are willing to kill themselves and their children rather than give up the battle against America. This effect truly buttresses Hong's argument that Barefoot Gen, quote, adopts the Potsdam, read American, post-war rationale that a new order of peace, security, and justice will be impossible until irresponsible militarism is driven from the world. And, quote, the war responsibility falls squarely, moreover, on the shoulders of those self-willed militaristic advisors whose unintelligent calculations brought the Empire of Japan to the threshold of annihilation. The fourth page and final page continues with Nakazawa's non-explicit thesis that Japan's annihilation was more or less equally on the shoulders of Japan itself. As the mother jumps to her death holding the resistant infant, named Hiroko, the girl's doll remains splayed on a rock at the bottom of the cliff, hammering in the tragedy of the scenario. The caption reads, spurred by a fervent belief in the victory of Japan, Japanese lives scattered over land, sea, and air. End quote. And the dead/dying Japanese bodies sing about their loyalty to the emperor. Hong's assertion that hibakusha literature such as Barefoot Gen does not heavily implicate America is thus corroborated, and the Western readers are left shaking their heads at Japan's devastation, but feeling very little guilt about America's role in it.